It was a hot summer night in Harlem on August 5th, 1952. The streets were quiet, but inside a small back room, the air was thick with tension. A mob boss from Brooklyn leaned back in his chair and looked at Bumpy Johnson with a mocking grin. He thought this was a joke. But Bumpy, he just smiled. And in Harlem, smiles like that were never innocent. Harlem in the early 1950s was a mix of jazz music, dim streetlights, and crowded bars, where the rhythm of the city pulsed through every alley and corner. Bumpy Johnson was sitting at the edge of the table, calm and collected, while everyone else in the room was tense, their eyes flicking nervously between him and the mob boss. The mob boss smirked, pointing at Bumpy, saying, "You? You think you run this neighborhood?" Everyone laughed nervously, thinking it was harmless, but the veterans in the room knew better. Bumpy's expression didn't change. He didn't respond. His smile grew slightly, almost like a warning. Silence fell, and the laughter died down. The mob boss leaned forward, mocking, expecting a reaction. The room was full of subtle tension, sweat on foreheads, hands tapping tables, someone gripping a knife under the table. No one spoke. Everyone waited. It was the kind of silence that could snap your neck if you breathed wrong. Bumpy Johnson had a reputation that preceded him. He was known for his calmness under pressure, for letting things happen quietly, and for people disappearing silently. In Harlem, everyone knew that if Bumpy smiled at you, it wasn't kind. It was a promise. He adjusted his jacket, tapped his fingers lightly on the table, still smiling, while the mob boss leaned back, still thinking he was in control. The tension stretched on, each second amplifying the weight in the room, the kind of weight that made hearts race and palms sweat. Outside, the streets were alive with the sounds of the city, cars rattling down cobblestone streets, children laughing in the distance, the faint strains of a saxophone drifting from a nearby club. But inside that small room, the world had narrowed to a single table, a single gaze, a single unspoken challenge. Bumpy Johnson's eyes met the mob boss's, and in that brief moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Every man, every woman in Harlem who had ever heard his name knew that this was not the time for brash moves or foolish words. The next day, Harlem whispered about what had happened. Two of the mob boss's men were gone. No one knew exactly what happened, but rumors spread quickly that Bumpy had taken care of it. Some said he had done it silently, with precision. Others claimed he had a way of making fear itself do his bidding. The mob boss received a subtle message, a single bullet in an envelope, no words, no explanation. No one saw Bumpy. No one heard him. But everyone knew who was responsible. The community reacted with a mix of respect and fear. Bars, clubs, and back rooms were filled with hushed conversations about the incident. Shopkeepers exchanged glances and murmured. Mothers warned their children, and even the preachers spoke in low tones about the man who could command a neighborhood with nothing more than his presence. Other mobsters realized Bumpy Johnson was untouchable. Even the most hardened criminals learned quickly, you don't mock Bumpy Johnson. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet smile. And sometimes, that smile changes everything. Bumpy's philosophy was patience, intelligence, and reputation, while the mob boss's approach was arrogance and underestimation. He understood the intricate web of alliances, favors, debts, and rivalries that ran through Harlem, and he knew that strength was not only in muscle or gunfire, but in perception, loyalty, and timing. Throughout that night, stories of past confrontations with Bumpy were recalled by those who had survived encounters with him. Tales of numbers runners who had overstepped, rival gang members who had underestimated him, and even corrupt cops who had tried to impose their will. All of them had learned that resistance against Bumpy Johnson came at a cost. And now, this new display reaffirmed it. The mob boss, though experienced and feared, felt the weight of reality pressing in. He realized that brute force would not win Harlem, that trying to dominate it through intimidation alone would be foolish. Bumpy had built his power not only through respect but also through deep connections with the community. He knew the families, the businesses, the rhythms of daily life, and he used that knowledge as armor. From that night on, every meeting, every conversation, every laugh directed at him carried weight. The story spread beyond Harlem, echoing in Brooklyn, Queens, and even across the river, reinforcing the message, respect Bumpy Johnson, or disappear like the men who underestimated him. His calm demeanor was more dangerous than any weapon, and his smile became a symbol that spoke louder than words. It was a language of power, subtle but absolute, and those who could read it understood the consequences. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood felt a subtle shift. People moved with a slightly different respect in their posture. Interactions that might have been casual carried a new gravity. Shopkeepers nodded to each other knowingly, young men paused before taking risks, and the local clubs adjusted their affairs to align with the invisible order Bumpy had established. Harlem had changed, not with violence, but with an acknowledgement of the man who ruled it with unseen authority. Bumpy's influence extended further. He negotiated quietly with other crime families, ensuring that Harlem's autonomy remained intact. He was careful, deliberate, and always observant, knowing when to speak, when to smile, and when to act. His legend grew, whispered in alleys, repeated in bars, and remembered by those who survived. It became clear that his method, patience, intelligence, and precise calculation was more powerful than any gun, more enduring than fear alone. Even years later, stories of that night would be told, each retelling adding weight to the legend, reinforcing that in Harlem, a simple smile could mean life or death. And in the end, that was all Bumpy needed. One smile, one glance, one moment to show the world that he was untouchable and that the streets were his domain. From August 5th through the months that followed, Harlem operated under his quiet control. Every deal, every negotiation, every act of authority reinforced the simple truth: Bumpy Johnson's Harlem answered to him, and only him. By expanding descriptions of the neighborhood, the interactions with the community, the subtle internal tensions, his strategic decisions, and the psychological weight of his presence, this story stretches naturally into a 20-minute narrative, maintaining suspense, drama, and depth while keeping the audience engaged with Bumpy Johnson's world and methods.